and thank you for joining us. As you know, February is Black History Month, and as we at COSTI continue our journey of learning, which we launched in 2023, we are pleased to join in conversation today with Refat Jiwani, Acting CEO at COSTI, and Jodie Glean Mitchell. Jodie is an award-winning anti-racism educator who has dedicated her career to developing educational programming in the field of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. Jodie attained her Master of Arts in Educational Studies from Concordia University and is currently completing her PhD in Education at York University. Her research focuses on the experiences of equity practitioners advancing racial equity and inclusion in post-secondary institutions. In 2017, Jodie was the recipient of the Leadership in Learning Award from the Canadian Association for the Prevention of Discrimination and Harassment in Higher Education, and in 2020, she received the Harry Jerome Diversity Award. Jodie co-developed and is a course instructor of the Transformative Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Leadership Certificate Program at Humber College. Today, she serves as the Executive Director, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Toronto. To get our conversation started, I will pose a question first to Refat on why is Black History Month important, especially for organizations like COSTI that work with diverse communities.
Thank you, Karen. And let me start by welcoming our guest here, Jodie. What an incredible background. It's great to have you with us. Maybe I'll start with a fact that perhaps not too many people will know. I actually am African. I was born in Tanzania, in East Africa. Although I obviously am of Indian heritage, I do relate very well to Blacks over the years as I grew up, and also after I emigrated to England and subsequently to Canada. So for me, particularly with COSTI as well, the Black History Month is very, very important. It really is an opportunity for us to celebrate the many contributions and achievements of Black individuals, but at the same time acknowledging that they have faced systemic barriers and continue to face those systemic barriers. For an organization like COSTI, which serves diverse communities, people like myself as well, it's essential to highlight the very rich history and culture of Black communities as part of fostering inclusivity and understanding. It's also a reminder that diversity is not just about representation. It's not a numbers game. It's about recognizing and valuing the unique experiences and stories that actually shape our society. So that is why I would say that for COSTI particularly, it's an extremely important time of the year. I recognize that we talk about 1 month. It actually should be an ongoing thing, but
yes, absolutely. So first, let me say thank you for the invitation to be in dialogue and conversation with all of you and with all of the listeners of this particular interview. Black History Month is of vital importance when we think about principles of inclusivity, when we think about that ultimate goal that many organizations strive to achieve around fostering that sentiment of belonging. The role that Black History Month plays really raises to the forefront some key values and principles, that of Sankofa, that of Ubuntu, when we think about the importance of looking back so that we can move forward, recognizing and honoring the champions of really important work that have sought to ensure that present day community members, present day diasporic members would not be engaging in the same struggles and with the same barriers that may have historically been present. And yet, while recognizing that there's uniqueness in the challenges that are being experienced today, and as such, the hope is that when we learn and get nurtured by the history and the richness of the tapestry of the history of African peoples and Black diasporic communities, that we are then equipped to be able to engage with present day challenges in order to move forward. So when we think about the important role of organizations such as COSTI, which play vital connecting in points for so many diverse community members, or particularly those of African descent, or those who identify as being part of the Black diasporic community, it is so vitally important that organizations hone in on the importance of the values of what Black History Month is meant to espouse. And while recognizing that while we talk about a month, as Refat was mentioning, the history of the peoples, the need to be nurtured, the need to be seen, the need to be valued, and the need to be fueled for the journey that lays ahead is a year-long process, today and every day.
Thanks for sharing that, Jodie, and thanks, Rafat, for speaking about should be beyond 1 month. So I would ask you, how can organizations like COSTI ensure Black history is recognized and valued beyond the just 1 month, beyond February?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that although we designate kind of the month of February, it really is a continuous process, okay? And for a country that has been built with immigration, um, diversity is just a fact of life, right? We just look around who is at the table right now, and you see the diversity. That just happens. I think we need to start integrating the principles of equity and inclusion in everything we do. And I think that now takes diversity to the next level. This means that we need to embed Black history into our educational programs. We need to be offering ongoing cultural competence training for staff. We need to be ensuring that Black voices are represented in leadership and decision making. We have come a long way in the last 100 years, but there is a longer way to go. So as Costia, we would push for year-round programming. We would push for partnerships with Black-led organizations, not just by Costi, but by everybody, not just in the not-for-profit sector, but basically everybody, every institution in Canada. And we should make intentional efforts to amplify Black stories and contributions. And these are crucial. And there are lots of these stories. We need to bring Black history into Canadian history. I think it deserves attention and celebration every day, not just in the month of February.
Jodie, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to springboard off of one of the terms that was just shared in Rafat's response around intentionality and the ways within which, whether it's COSTI or any organizations, can ensure that Black History Month is recognized and or valued, first requires a will and an intentionality to do so. It must be part of the planning process, not 2-3 weeks before before the month begins, but as we think about what our overall plans are, how are we elevating not only the celebrations that ought to occur within the month itself, but how are we elevating and recognizing the unique experiences of our Black community members? What does that look like in our orientation programs? What does that look like in our resources? Where we connect in with volunteers? What are our education and training programs looking like? We are in a time where uh, color evasiveness and identity evasiveness is really starting to take root, where there's a running away from the need to speak specifically about race, to speak specifically about the unique challenges various racialized communities encounter, particularly Black community members. And so naming is important, talking about anti-Black racism, how it's defined, how it's experienced, how is it manifest, and the unique resources and pathways that ought to be thought through and implemented within many organizations is critically important. And so while we recognize the importance of fostering inclusive environments, the need for equitable strategies, with the ultimate goal of striving for belonging, one of the roots in engaging in those goals and meeting those goals does indeed require intentionality and a belief, particularly from folks in leadership, whether you are on the board or whether you are administrative lead, to champion this very sentiment within our organizations.
Thanks, Jody. So, I was going to ask what role you felt education played in promoting and understanding Black history and its relevance in today's society. But based on what both you and Rifat said, it is clear to me that education plays a very, very important part. Um, but what I wanted to ask now, you are an educator. Are you able to share with me an example from your career where Black History Month programming significantly impacted a community or an organization?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. One thing that I would say, so indeed, I do identify myself as an educator. I do believe that though change within an organization cannot exclusively be done through education programming, there is actually no change within an organization without it. And so, as such, there is an ongoing need to ensure that robust, ongoing, intentional program, curriculum, think through development and implementation as it relates to whether it's EDI work more broadly, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or even more specifically in addressing the unique challenges that community members experience, such as anti-Black racism, does require intentionality. And so there isn't a sort of one workshop, one event, or one entity that is the panacea for all things, that is the magic wand. What it requires is the planting of seeds. And I think that's probably one of the most effective ingredients of education, is that it begins, and once it's done on an ongoing basis, it's not seen as a checklist item. It is implemented in the very fabric of an organization. Ongoing efforts in education, programming, community building, uh, community building initiatives and projects does indeed start to turn the tide around the deepening of understanding, recognizing tools and skills that are needed in order to really advance inclusive environments for Black community members. One of the things I will say that is that I do find very unique to Black History Month is that there is something about being with family. And many times when I'm in programming that is specific to Black History Month, whether we are looking at and tackling, some of the key issues under the banner of Black History Month, or whether we are celebrating achievements, works, efforts of historical contributions from Black African diasporic community members and or present day, there is something about when we are present in space and community that really just allows for a collective exhale, that allows for folks to be seen, for folks to be understood, and for folks to feel like they can truly be themselves in many spaces of an organization. So I would say it's a two-part piece where the effectiveness of education is really dependent on its intentionality and the ongoing nature within which it's implemented. And yet at the same time, recognizing that sometimes it could just take one event that can really curate a space for someone to say, I can make it today. Right. And so really recognizing that there's a dual purpose and dual impacts that education and community building initiatives can have.
Thanks for that. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are on a journey of learning. The journey has begun. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot we can gather from people like yourself, people from Rifat who's got experience. So what I would like to ask as we sort of wrap up this brief conversation is, first I'd ask you, Jody, and then I would pass it on to Rifat, is what advice you would give to leaders in our sector, in the settlement sector, in the sector that serves such diverse communities, seeking to make Black History Month more meaningful and impactful?
Thank you for this question. The first principle that comes to mind is that of intersectionality. So one of the advice that I would give is to ensure that as we think through programming, initiatives, projects that may fall specifically under the banner of Black History Month, or that may be a bit more broader in tackling the unique challenges that Black community members experience and or wanting to increase proactively the inclusivity of our organizations, centering the framework of intersectionality in how we go about doing that is extremely important. And what I mean by that is ensure that we are continuously questioning and reflecting upon who are we referring to when we speak about the Black community, all of whom are our efforts engaging with, whether it's 2S LGBTQ plus communities, persons with different abilities, whether we're looking at different socioeconomic status, different ages, where we're really working within intergenerational workplaces, amongst many other key diversity factors in terms of the identities that we hold. Sometimes when we engage in Black History Month programming or in initiatives that is to tackle anti-Black racism, sometimes we too ought to question who's not at the table, who's missing from this conversation, so that we can ensure that our efforts are as wide reaching to the greatest extent possible. And the second advice that I would give to leaders is to stand firm in your values, truly root the work in foundational principles. We know that equity, diversity, and inclusion work is about the people, right? It's about people, it's about their livelihoods, and it's about ensuring that to the greatest extent that it can be afforded, that everyone has access to opportunities. And we are in a time when those principles are being questioned or being redefined for the sector. And so that has direct impacts on how we can address anti-Black racism in our work. And so there has never been a more critical time than to truly be firm and rooted in these values and principles so that we can chart what may be really challenging terrain in the months and years to come.
Thanks for that, Refat.
Yeah, Jodie, I think you covered most of it. If I may just add to that, you talked about intentionality and interactions, and one thing that I would suggest to organizations is that this is something that needs to be looked at from a very authentic perspective, right? This is something that needs to come from the heart. It's not a question of doing what you've been told to do. And it reminds me of this little example of, you don't fish for people, you teach them how to fish, right? So when we're educating, we're not doing it for them. We're showing them how to think. We are asking them to go beyond just. And when you look at the past, sometimes people say, well, you really shouldn't worry about the past and you just focus on the future. But you do need to look in the rearview mirror in order to figure out how you're going to drive forward, right? So I think one piece of advice I would give is to make sure you understand where we are coming from and understand why we are trying to do what we're trying to do. The second piece of advice I would give is that commitment needs to come from the top. Okay, for anything that is sustainable, the commitment has to start from the top, right? And if the top understands and starts to work on it, then it can transcend through. You can't tell somebody to do something without you doing it yourself, right? So for people to be able to understand what this means, first of all, they need to hear it from the people above them. And in organizations, I think it is critical for it to start right at the very top, right at the board of directors level, and then work its way through the organization. So it gets embedded in the culture and operations of the organization, and not just for the month of February, for a year round situation, right? So it deserves more than a month. I think it's a corner of the whole story that we share. And so I think that those are the sort of two pieces of advice that I would give to organizations: is be very authentic in your intentionality, make sure there is support from the top, and that it does get embedded as part and parcel of the culture and operations of the organization, not just as an exercise where somebody is ticking a box.
Thank you both. This has been incredibly informative. I wish we could continue further because I feel I could learn so much from both of you. I truly appreciate the time that you've shared with us today, taking the time out of your very busy schedules. And I hope for our listeners and those who are joining us today that you have found this as informative as I have. Thank you.